Walter told me I had to introduce him as Walter Jones, man of destiny. We've done that part, and now I have to check my Instagram. No, not really. Don't ever buy an HP 4100 printer because they don't work. So that's why I just take a picture of my notes, and that's why I'm reading them. Unfortunately, it's very short because we all want to get to Walter, and I'm happy also because this summer, it so happened I went to a memorial service for a friend up at the Custer battlefield, and so I'm really excited to hear what Walter has to say. Okay. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be asked to introduce my good friend Walter Jones. I've done it a couple of times. I'm not going to try and describe his many accomplishments because that was done so well in the Westerners newsletter. I know everyone wants to get to this fascinating topic and not listen to me. So I'll just mention a couple of things about Walter I learned from over 30 years of being colleagues and friends. I met Walter soon after I started work at Special Collections at the Marriott Library in 1983, and it wasn't long before we became friends based on shared interests: military history, Western history, the oil field, and many others. Walter and I worked together successfully on many library committees and task forces and planning sessions for all the renovations that we went through at the library and at Archivist Conference and things. Walter could always be counted on to be completely fair-minded and to find solutions to problems that we faced. He was a valued presence on committees and other groups because of that very reason. Walter and I traveled to any number of archivists and history conferences together. And being at those meetings with him was always a pleasure. I remember we went to Sacramento for Western History Association. Walter and I toured all over the railroad museums and just had a great time. We actually went up to Custer Battlefield at another Western History Association meeting that we all went together. We also put together sessions. We would have similar topics. We put together a panel for sessions at Western History, at the Conference of Intermountain Archivists, and Utah State History, things like that. We always had a great time. I really enjoyed working with him. Besides work, Walter and I also spent time together outside of the library. I remember one time in particular when he was, his master's thesis was on oil development in Wyoming in the 19th century. And so I grew up in the oil fields, and so we went out to look at the old abandoned wells out in west of Evanston and around all in there. And we were driving all around looking at all these old bull wheels and just really interesting stuff. And it so happened I had an old 8mm Mauser, a German Mauser, that I thought, well, we're going to Wyoming, go shoot a gun. And he and I got to talking, and I got stopped for speeding on I-80. And the state patrolman came up and saw the gun laying in the back. He instantly kind of backed up and had me get out and show him. And I'm sure Walter was thinking of going to jail in Evanston. But luckily, it was Wyoming, so it's okay to have a gun. I count Walter as one of my best friends from my career in the Marriott, and still enjoy visiting, having lunch every month or so. We used to always go to Sukasa. For years, we went to Sukasa over here for lunches. Now we go to the Rio Grande. And I'm still keeping in touch. I'll close by saying that Walter is one of those rare people about whom no one ever has a bad thing to say. And today, that is really quite an accomplishment. Walter?
Tonight I'm going to talk about a very tragic set of events. My opinion of war is also reflected in what I'm going to say right now. Nobody won this battle because a lot of people died, but also a lot of people were removed from the scene. I'm talking about the Lakota and the Cheyenne. Very tragic set of events. The action of the Little Bighorn battle was in the Powder River Basin, which is a part of northeastern Wyoming and southeastern Montana. Very rich area of the 1800s. Lots of buffalo. wildlife just abundantly. Water, grass, right up next to the Bighorn Mountains, so there was timber. This was a paradise for the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. We wanted them out. Okay. Now, the rivers of the Powder River Basin are one, the Yellowstone. That's the northern boundary of Powder River. The Wind River Bighorn. This is a weird river. Starts in the Wind River Mountains, goes through the Wind River Basin, Wind River Canyon. When it comes out of the Wind River Canyon, it is renamed as the Bighorn River, the Bighorn River. It's in the Bighorn Basin. It's not part of the Powder River Basin, but toward the end of the river it is. Now joining it will be the Little Bighorn River that starts in the Powder River Basin, arches over through the gaps in the Bighorn Mountains and joins the Bighorn. The Rosebud River, or creek, it's actually not a big river, but it's a waterway. The Tongue River, that's a river that has some play in tonight's narrative. Finally, the Powder River. The Lakota loved the Black Hills too much. We took it from them. This is a nice artist conception of the Lakota up in the Black Hills. Now here is a book that will give you an appreciation of what the Lakota were and what they lost. Terrible, but here it is. The book by Jeff Ostler. By the way, Jeff got an English degree at the University of Utah, then went on to Oregon to get a PhD in history. He's a good writer. He just became emeritus at the University of Oregon. I got to find some notes here. Okay. Here are the Lakota, sitting in the Powder River Basin. Beautiful land. You can see, even though artists like to embellish a little bit, this was great for the Lakota, and they had allies, the Cheyenne and some Arapaho. But they're living up in the Bighorn, up in the Powder River Basin. There are a lot of them. Sitting Bull was one of them. He was the major leader. Now, one thing about Sitting Bull I want to be very clear on here, he did not fight in the Little Bighorn battle. He was there, but he wasn't a combatant. People gathered to him. He was a magnet. So not only did he get the Hunkpapa following him, but he got the Oglala, he got the Miniconju, he got all sorts of people around him, and they swelled into a great organization in the fall of 1875 and the winter of 1875-76. They were harassing up there. They didn't want to give up what they had, and they knew that the Northwestern Railroad was coming through the Yellowstone area, so they harassed. They harassed John Gibbon. John Gibbon was a colonel at Fort Ellis in Montana, Civil War veteran. By the end of 1875 and early 1876, there were a lot of Indians living in the Powder River Basin. Bad. Our government didn't want them there. They were supposed to be on the reservation east of the Black Hills. By the way, they couldn't have the Black Hills, even though we promised it to them, but they had to get out of the Powder River Basin by the end of January, 1876. Now they were given that date, and they were told, if you don't go, you're hostile. Meaning, we can do a military punitive action against you. Get out. They didn't go. They were where they wanted to be. They were where they felt good. They were in their commissary, their supermarket. They were where they had everything that life could offer them. So they didn't go. There is again the major player in this in so many ways. Basically, what he was a mystic. He was a good warrior, but he was a gentle person, charismatic. So people just gathered around him. But the military is going to have they're going to have an operation in the Powder River Basin to chase and punish the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. Philip Sheridan, a very pugnacious guy who had mixed feelings about the Indians, but a good Civil War warrior. But he was now in command of all the troops west of the Mississippi. He wanted an operation, an expedition. So he gave it to basically Alfred Terry, John Gibbon, and George Crook. But the first thing he did, he let Alfred Terry decide a three-pronged attack. From the east is going to, or the west is going to come John Gibbon, colonel. This is a neat picture of him. This is later. Here he is, a colonel, and he's sitting with the Nez Perce leader, Chief Joseph, who he chases later. But he's going to amass some troops. He's going to have about 500 coming from Fort Ellis east along the Yellowstone River. Now he's going to have a mix of cavalry and infantry, 500, just about. Numbers, as I try to do the kind of research I do on things like this, every source has a different number. Every source has a different source for it. But there's Gibbon. There's Alfred Terry, general from Fort Abraham Lincoln in Bismarck, North Dakota, along the Missouri River. He's reluctant to do this, but Sheridan's his boss, and Sheridan says, do it. So Terry gets together with his troops. He's going to have nearly 1,000 soldiers, cavalry and infantry. And among those 1,000 he has, this is a big number, he's going to have Custer's elite cavalry, the 7th Cavalry. They're elite in mind only. 10% are absolutely new people. 25% have been there maybe a year, and the rest maybe 5 years. Most of these people were never on horses before they enlisted in the Army. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't have a lot of training, particularly training of shooting while riding. They were elite in reputation. There is on the Missouri River and the Yellowstone River a lot of steamboat traffic. It's trafficked up and down that river with lots of buffaloes, hides, and so forth to trade for manufactured goods and liquor or tobacco. But Terry has a boat that supplies him. It's the Far West. He has that boat dropping off supplies at the mouth of the Powder River, which is going into the Yellowstone River. He's going to create a base camp there. Very important. Army people can't live without supplies. Indians can move around and they've got the supplies wherever they go. But cavalry and infantry have to be supplied by stores, depots. So Terry creates his depot at the Powder River, the mouth of the Powder River, and the Far West and others are going to give him what he needs. He leaves an infantry company there. He picks up some infantry companies from a place called Fort Buford, further upstream, downstream. But there he is, and he's in command of this whole expedition. He's the one that's going to call some of the shots. The Lakotas call the rest of them. But he's going to have a plan. The third person involved is George Crook. Now, he bungles. But I'll say one thing good about him. After he retired from the military, he became a very strong for Indian rights. He dealt with Indians. He killed a lot of them. But the point being, Indian rights. So he has a lot of soldiers. He's comparable to Alfred Terry, although Terry's in command. But he has about 1,000 people. Again, infantry and cavalry. Now he puts his infantry on mules. And people may laugh at him, but mules are very practical in the West, much more practical than covered wagons. Mules can go better on rough terrain. So he supplies himself with mules. He rides mules himself. But there's Crook. Sitting Bull hears about an expedition coming after him. So he calls for a Sundance. Their Sundances are very important religious ceremonies. They torture themselves, and through that torture, they purify themselves, and they can have visions. Sitting Bull has a vision. He has his brother strip 50 strips of flesh off of Sitting Bull. And then he goes through the Sundance, which is very, very tiring, exhausting. He bleeds. It's painful. But at the end of this ceremony, he's taken into a tent and attended to by medicine man. And he has a vision. He sees the white soldiers coming after him. He sees this clearly. But what he sees is the white soldiers are dropping out of the sky, i.e. they're dying. Now he says a few Indians will die too. But what he says, he sees a great victory. So he sees this victory. Now he's right. This is a prophecy that comes true to an extent. The one thing he fails to see is what happens after the victory. You've probably heard of the saying, you win the battle and lose the war. They're going to win this battle, but they're going to lose the war. So there's Sitting Bull. He is seeing, he's prophesized, people are getting ready for the Wasuchi. That's white man in Lakota. I speak many languages. That word is in Jeff Ostler's book on the Lakota. Terry has this plan, and it baffles me a little bit because I have not found evidence of why he is not including Crook in his plan, but I'll show you in a minute why he can't include Crook. But I have no evidence that he had heard of what happened to Crook. And he probably did, but I can't find any statements that said, yeah, he knows George Crook is out of the play. But Terry has a plan. He's going to join forces with Gibbon. Gibbon's moving along the Yellowstone River, and he meets Terry at the Powder River supply depot. So they join up. Now the next part of his plan, they're going to move back the way that Gibbon came, west on the Yellowstone River, but Custer's going to break off. Now Sheridan and Terry, and nobody ever had a plan that all three columns, the one coming from Wyoming, that's George Crook from Fort Fetterman, or Gibbon from the west, or Terry from the east, they had no plan that they were actually going to meet and then attack. What they were going to do was harass and push and attack separately. But Custer is the first to go. So as they move along the Yellowstone, he breaks off and goes down the Rosebud. This is his plan. I mean, this is Terry's plan. Custer's going to act as the striking force. They were going to converge on the mouth of the Little Bighorn. I get all these rivers mixed up. They were going to converge after harassment. But something goes wrong. Now, the top part of this map, this is a very good map for visuals on this deal, but Terry and Gibbon are moving, Custer goes down, But look at this lower part of the equation here. Crook is coming up with his cavalry and his infantry on the mules. He has maybe 1,000 people short, just short of that. But he's coming up from Fort Fetterman, Wyoming, and he stops at what is now Sheridan, Wyoming. That's on the Tongue River. He creates a supply base on the Tongue River. Then he takes his combatants north. Now this is one thing I have never understood, and I don't find any plausible reasons for it, but he goes north, and he rests his soldiers, and he puts out no pickets, no listening posts, no reconnaissance. He just rests. The thing that saved him, it saved his bacon, absolutely, was the Lakota were coming after him. Lakota and some Cheyenne and some Arapaho. They were coming down in force, just as heavy as his force, and they attack. The fortunate thing for Crook is his scouts are out there ahead. They're doing their job. They're not resting. They bump into the Lakota first, and there's a fierce firefight. That tells Crook something's going on up there. So he begins to react, and it's a huge all-day battle. And it's a shock to Crook. Crook, Custer, Terry, Gibbon were Civil War veterans. They were used to massive attacks in which thousands would die in a 1 to 3 day period. Gettysburg, 51,000 casualties. Antietam, the most casualties in 1 day in the entire Civil War. This is the kind of war these men were faced with. So it's kind of baffling that Crook was as shaken up as he was by 1,000 Lakota coming after him and killing 10 of his men. Although his soldiers certainly fire a lot of rounds. Then they withdraw. But so do the Lakota. The Lakota have made their point. We're up here, don't come any farther. Crook, as you can see by this map, goes south to his supply base. And for the next month, he has his soldiers hunting and fishing and playing baseball. They don't progress again. They're out of the picture. I don't understand that. And I've never found anything to tell me that Crook was thinking other than just backing up in shock. He said, I've read he's waiting for reinforcements, he has to wait for ammunition, but he only lost a few people. He must be able to muster 900, but he doesn't go any further. So, and Terry must know about this, because Terry does not include Crook in his plans with Gibbon and Custer. Here he is, Custer, the boy general. Custer, man of destiny. I like that one. But now, these numbers up here on the board are from a good source, but they don't agree with other sources. One thing is certain, Custer's 7th Cavalry has 12 troops, or 12 companies. Each company on the books should have 60 people, 60 soldiers, plus you've got a headquarters. So you should have around 720 to 730 soldiers. Custer doesn't have nearly that. His companies are short-staffed. This is going to make a big difference. But there's Custer and the number of people he has, according to one source. So he leaves the depot, goes south along the Rosebud. Then he comes to the divide between the Rosebud Valley and the Little Bighorn Valley. He's going to have to cross over it. Everything is telling him that there are Indians on the Little Bighorn. They don't know where they are. They don't have drones. They don't have reconnaissance aircraft, helicopters. They're guessing. But the scouts are giving them good ideas. Hey, they're up there. So Custer takes them over the divide between the Rosebud and the Little Bighorn. There they are. That's just a drawing. I just put that in so I could say, here comes Custer. He goes up the divide on the Rosebud side, starts at 11 o'clock at night. He marches his people pretty hard. He's hardcore with these guys. They don't like him. In fact, he has an officer that hates him. But they go over the divide, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, he stops them for a rest. The soldiers absolutely have been pushed. They just drop to the ground, hold the reins of their horses, and go to sleep. They don't take the saddles off. They don't take blankets, nothing. They just lie on the ground. But as one source writes, they're used to this. These are men under hard conditions that they've suffered before. So they're used to it. At 3 o'clock, look at that. That's only an hour. They're given an hour to rest. Now they're given breakfast. This is their last meal. Raw bacon, hard tack, and water. These are guys that are going to be pushed to their ultimate physical limits in a few hours. That's all they're given. But they're used to it. Custer makes a very fateful decision at 9 o'clock in the morning. He stops his column, and they're way, I always get this mixed up, they're way upriver from where the Indian camp is, but they know where it is now. They can see it from the divide. There's a place called the Crow's Nest. They look down from the Crow's Nest and see what looks like a bunch of little squiggly worms. Bunches of worms. But what they are warriors' horses. 20,000 of them. Now each warrior has more than one horse, so there's not 20,000 warriors, but there's a lot of ponies out there feeding off the grass. So Custer stops his command at 9 o'clock in the morning and has what we call in the military officer's call. This is Custer's chief scout. His name is Mitch Boyer, either Boyer or Boyer, however you want to pronounce it. But his father was French-Canadian, his mother was Lakota. Custer told Boyer that Boyer could take the scouts and take off. They can leave. But Bullet, I don't mean Bullet, but Boyer tells Custer, I'm not afraid to go any place you go. But if we go up this valley, we're going to wake up tomorrow in hell. In other words, he's warning Custer, this is not good. Here's a man of discretion. He's not a coward. He goes with Custer, and some of the scouts do too. But he's warning Custer. Custer makes a big mistake, and it's going to cost him his life and 210 other soldiers' lives. He divides his command. There's something in the military called, and I'm talking without notes here, multiplier effect. You put 10 people out with rifles and start shooting at somebody, you're going to have a certain amount of power. But you put a machine gun in there too, that multiplies the power. You put another 50 people there and maybe 5 cannon, you've got multiplier after multiplier. But Custer is dividing that multiplier and weakening his central force. And I'll get into that in a minute. So anyway, he divides his command. He has a scout named Half Yellow Face. Half Yellow Face says, hey, this is not good. This, in the face of what we're going to get into, is bad. Custer curtly tells Half Yellow Face, mind your own operations. Yellow Face gets off his horse, takes off all his clothes, and starts putting dirt on himself. He's telling Custer, it's over. this isn't going to last for us. He sees it, Boyer sees it, and half Yellowface sees it. They're the voice of caution. Now, one thing about Custer, I like that analogy of going home on a trail they'd never seen, but basically, Custer is nervous. He gets nervous sometimes and he becomes grumpy and petulant. And that's the way he is now. He knows something is going on. But he has what they call Custer's look. He lived through so many battles in the Civil War. In one battle in Virginia, he was cavalry. He was surrounded by the Confederates. And his chief wagon master came up to him and said, "Shouldn't I move our supply wagons to the rear?" Excuse the expression. Custer looked around and said, "Where the hell is the rear?" He was totally surrounded, and he hacked his way out. So that's Custer. There he is. He's being warned. I like this map. It shows some geologic features that are really good. You see some hills, some bluffs. You see a river, and across that river is flatland. Well, that's geologic operations. The river is cutting into the hill. So it's the hilly side is called the cutbank. The flat side is called the slip-off slope. Now the Indians are smart and they're going to live on the slip-off slope. I wanted to be a geologist once. That's why I had to bring this up. I love this term. I love this expression. But anyway, Custer has divided his command. He's going to send a guy named Benteen off on a wild goose chase upriver, off the map. He's going to send Reno, who has a battalion, down to the flatlands. And then Custer himself is going to go across the hills to his destiny. But he divides his command. Now I want to mention something here because I'll probably forget it later. I'll show this map again, but here's something very important. Down at the bottom on the left-hand side is a term non-combatants. This is Indian women and children. They're going to watch the battle. And I'll get into the significance of that in a few minutes. Reno does what he's told. He goes down into the flats. One thing he does, as he's down there, he's going to see those Indians coming after him, but he looks up and sees Custer waving his hat at Reno. So Reno has some hope that Custer's going to bail him out. Custer doesn't. So anyway, Reno's down there, and he sees what may be 1,000 or more Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho coming at him at full speed. Now Custer's people, all of his people, are basically competent, but they're not experts. This is almost like West High School's basketball players played the Jazz. Reno is totally out of his water. What he does, as he sees these people coming to them, they're charging. They have some concepts that spur them on. Most of these people coming after him have been in training since childhood. How to ride a horse, how to hunt buffalo, how to count coup. They are the experts. And they're coming at Reno hard and fast. So Reno does something that is understandable. He gets his people off his horses and forms what's called a skirmish line. That is a group of soldiers standing basically shoulder to shoulder facing the oncoming opponents. But they may have a little distance between them. But when he got them off their horses, they have a SOP that requires 1 out of every 4 or 5 cavalrymen to hold the reins for the other cavalrymen. So Reno is taking out 20 to 25% of his combatants to simply hold the horses. And the horses aren't going to be very stable, so the people holding the horses are going to have a challenge. But Reno, this is a common problem in the Army in the West, drinking. But Reno has it full blown. He's drinking hard. He has his soldiers withdraw into the timber along the river. They do that. One poor sergeant, young man, doesn't get the word. It's hard to communicate under these circumstances. So his head is found 2 days later in the remnants of the Lakota village. But Reno gets his people into the timber. More and more and more Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho began to infiltrate those woods. There's a lot of noise, rifles firing, people yelling. There's smoke from the gunpowder. It's really a confusing situation at best, and Reno is not the best to handle it. Reno's basic scout, half yellow face, or bloody knife. This is bloody knife. Bloody knife gets shot in the back of the head with a bullet, and the brains and the skull, all these debris go all over Reno. Reno loses it. He takes off. Some say he said retreat, but this becomes chaos. The soldiers, seeing each other go, start off chaotically. There is no order here. No stay behind blocking force. It's every man for himself on this thing. The Indians are mingled with them, killing them. These poor guys, some of them fall off their horses going up the bluff, and they desperately hang on to their horses' tails to get up that bluff. The Indians don't pursue them up the bluff at this time. Indians agreed that, hey, this wasn't combat, this wasn't a battle, this was a buffalo hunt. And the buffalo are passive, so they're getting killed. Once Reno gets up the hill, he has about 40 of his people, and he has 3 understrength companies. He maybe has 120 or 130, so he loses a lot of people. Well, here come the Indians to butcher the dead soldiers. They kill those that aren't dead, and they butcher them. There's a religious side to this. They feel, and I've read this in many sources, that if they mutilate somebody, that person's going to have a harder time getting into heaven. But Reno's up the hill. Now I'm going to stop Reno for just a second. Custer, when he begins to realize, when he wakes up and thinks he's up to something, he's up for more than he had bargained for, he sends a bugler back to get Benteen. Now, play more on that in a minute. But Benteen gets the word and starts forward, but Reno stops him. One of Benteen's companies goes forward in an attempt to reach Custer. This guy is Thomas Weir, a friend of Custer's. But he goes forward. There right now is no command structure here giving orders, so everybody thinks, hey, an order has been given, let's go. So Benteen follows because Benteen is a soldier. Reno follows because he's scared and doesn't want to get left behind. So they go forward. See, Reno is in no capacity. And by the way, I keep calling Benteen Major here. I don't know why. He was only a captain. He retired as major, but you'll see that mistake constantly in the next few slides. So anyway, basically, Here come a huge number of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho after Benteen and Reno. This tells me that Custer is done. If they could give so many soldiers or so many warriors to these two battalions now, they don't need a whole lot around what's left of Custer. Reno and Benteen go into a perimeter. And here is something smart. Custer kept dividing his forces. And I'll get into that again in a minute. But Benteen and Reno maintain unit integrity. They back up. See, Major, he's capped. Benteen is taking over. He's not in command, but he is the calm person here. He has a lieutenant who's very good. Stay behind with 20 people to block, or at least to slow down, the rushing Lakota. So everybody gets out of there. And Godfrey, the lieutenant, handles this beautifully, calmly. He has fire and maneuver. They all get back to that perimeter. They don't have any protection in that perimeter, but they do have interlocking fields of fire. The Lakota keep trying to attack, but because there are maybe 200 plus soldiers here, and they're firing in unison, they're covering each other, they hold the Indians off under two huge, massive assaults. At sundown, the shooting stops. Now here's something scary. And here's something I've seen so much contradictory evidence. The soldiers who are tired, they have their wounded with them, they have some dead, their horses have been shot, they're not going to get any sleep. And what they hear from this massive village, just about a mile and a half ahead of them, they hear drums beating. They see huge bonfires. They hear singing. Warriors are shooting their rifles into the air. Now here's where I don't know exactly what's being sung. Some said the Indians are just singing morning songs. They lost 31 soldiers against Custer. Or 31 warriors. That's not a lot, but to a warrior, that's a lot. So they're singing some morning songs. Some say they're also singing celebratory songs because they just won a battle. But the soldiers up on the hill have to face that noise all night. Now, I love this statement. Custer's battle is the Thermopylae of the plains. But that came from a book by Deanna Stillman, who wrote a delightful little book about the relationship between Sitting Bull and Buffalo Bill Colby. Great book. Now here is a cavalry officer. This is Captain Yates. Custer had 5 companies after he left Benteen and Reno. He divides them again. He sends Yates, Captain Yates, down to secure a crossing on the river. Here's where Custer stopped for a few minutes. He's not down with Yates, but he's waiting for Benteen. So he sends his bugler, big village, be quick. Benteen has the extra ammunition. Here's the map again. Now here's where everything is a whole lot of conjecture. There are Indian interviews, good ones. There are markers where the 7th Cavalry that lived in Benteen and Reno marked the places they found the dead Custer people. And there are archaeological findings, but no one knows the mind of Custer here because he's dead. There's going to be nobody testifying for him. Okay, so what he does, see, it shows the line of Custer, conjecture. Yates goes down, but what Yates does, he meets a buzzsaw. The Indians aren't going to let him across the river. So he goes back up, he joins Custer. Custer leaves 3 companies up on that hill that's called Calhoun Hill. And Custer takes Yates' 2 companies and his own staff. They go down to the river. So there he goes down. He's trying to afford, and what people think, and this is conjecture, Custer one time extracted himself from being surrounded by a whole lot of Cheyenne down in Oklahoma at a river called the Washita. He captured Indian women and children and used them as a human shield to get out of there. So some people think he wants to capture some Indian women and children and have the Lakota back off and say, okay, truce. But he doesn't get across the river. They have to back up. There's maybe 80 people here, maybe 100. But they're getting so overwhelmed, they're backing up. Crazy Horse gets in the action. He attacks the 3 companies Custer left up above at Calhoun Hill. Crazy Horse is a huge admirer of Sitting Bull. But Sitting Bull isn't participating. Crazy Horse is 10 years younger, and he is so enervated by this. He goes up there, and they basically decimate Keogh's and Calhoun's companies. 3 companies. Okay. There are so many drawings, so many paintings, they're all inaccurate, but here's an Anheuser-Busch one. Custer is now, he knows he's in trouble. He orders his soldiers to kill their horses so they can use their horses as I can't think of the word. Their horses are going to protect them because they can hide behind their dead carcasses. But when a soldier kills his horse, that's basically saying, this is the end. There is not much left. So they do that, they kill their horses. Custer has a bunch of people with him. They're on that hill, Custer Hill. A few men, this is tragic from the point of view of the elite 7th Cavalry. A few men survive Crazy Horse's attack and stagger down to Custer. So that's as a few. Custer has his 2 brothers there. He has a few others there that are close to him, but they're fighting for the rest of their lives. Now, people that saw the battle, and I kind of like the Lakota way of describing time. It's at Washita, a Cheyenne said the battle that Custer attacked the village lasted about the time it takes to smoke 2 pipes of tobacco. Here, they're saying Custer's fight lasted about the time it takes to eat a good meal. Here's the vision of Custer. A lot of dead soldiers with a few Indians surrounding, and the victors are in the center of the circle. Now, I showed you that picture of the non-combatants in that map. They're waiting to go strip and mutilate the bodies of Custer's men. There is no question at this time who is going to be victorious. So the women and children go up, and they terribly mutilate the bodies. They don't mutilate Custer. In fact, one theory is they didn't even know that was Custer until they got up to him. But they do what they have to do. Here is a description of an Arapaho warrior and what he saw. See, he's saying that Custer has a few wounded around him. Custer's no longer fighting. He's stunned. He's wounded. He's bleeding out of his face. He's gone. So that's the end of that. There have been 2 excellent movies about Custer's Last Stand, that are more than simple allegories. There's a good one called Little Bighorn, but Earl Flynn starred in a Custer movie, and then Robert Shaw starred in a Custer movie. Both movies showed Custer as the last man standing. Now back to Benteen and Reno. Here's what the the Powder River Basin looks like from Reno and Benteen's perimeter. On the morning of the 26th, Custer's dead on the 25th. On the 26th, the Indians resume pressure, but they can't attack. Reno and Benteen have a professionalism that allows them to hold off assaults. But there's a lot of firing going in on the perimeter, but they survive. Benteen is the real hero of the 7th Cavalry. Now, he is basically a Civil War veteran. He's calm. He turns into an alcoholic later. So does Reno. They must have terrible PTSD, but who knows? Benteen joined the Union Army during the Civil War, whereas his father was a die-hard secessionist who owned slaves, and they disowned each other. Benteen's a hero here. He remains calm. Now, during the night, Reno is so shook up, he suggests to Benteen, hey, let's exfiltrate. Let's get out of here. But that means leaving their wounded. Benteen will have none of it. He stays and stands as an inspiration to a lot of frightened soldiers. I love this picture. This is not of that era. This is much later. I'll bet this is around 1900. But there's a Lakota village in the Powder River Basin. Look how their teepees are configured. They're not as symmetrically designed as the yellow map I showed you, but there they are. That's a nice photograph. Basically, the Indians surrounding Benteen and Reno withdraw. Then they take off. And they take off in a huge caravan. I mean, it's 3 miles long and 1 mile wide. And the Indians start fires to camouflage their movement. They head toward the Bighorn Mountains, but they're going to have to disperse because the army's going to come after them with a vengeance. They win the battle, but they're going to lose the war. Here are 4 of Custer's scouts that left before the battle, so they're able to come back. This is 1908, 1909, someplace in there. They go back to the battlefield. I show this slide because it shows the markers at the Little Bighorn battle site in 1909. Crosses. Basically, some of the Crow scouts bump into Terry and Gibbon. Terry and Gibbon are going down the Bighorn River. They bump into a rear guard of several hundred Lakota who are stopping forward movement so their families can get out of there. When Gibbon and Terry reach the village, they're on the side of the river of the village. What they find is a lot of debris. Boots, bloody clothing, severed heads, 3 of them. They find a lot of stuff, but across the river, the soldiers patrolling that area discover 197 bodies, all bloated, mutilated, and rotting in the sun. The men from Benteen and Reno's battalions have to bury the dead. And these are very shallow graves, at the most 18 inches. They just want to get them off the earth. Now, we're just about the end, so thank you for your patience. But basically, here is the captain of the Steamboat Far West. He's on the Yellowstone coming down the Bighorn River. Again, numbers are evasive. I've read as many as 55 wounded, but I like this number because it comes from Donovan, who wrote A Terrible Glory, and I trust him. But there's about 52 wounded. Some aren't wounded bad enough that they have to be put on the boat. So there's about 39 put on the boat. 2 died on the way to Fort Abraham Lincoln. But the river captain makes that long trip in 50-some hours. That man is skilled. He's going through rivers at night that have logs in them, sandbars, all sorts of traps, but he gets to Bismarck. The 2 big participants. Thank you. That's the story. Let me warn you about one thing. My hearing aid batteries just died. So if you have questions, have somebody come up and ask me and I'll answer. But I know we're just about out of time. We have 3 minutes left. Here comes Ken. I think I'm about to be told.
No. I'll scream in your ear. I'll hear a question. Do we have any questions just for a minute?
Pat has a question. Can you answer the question for me? Can you ask the question? Go ahead. Go ahead, Pat.
What about Comanche, the surviving horse, or is that just a legend?
What about Comanche's surviving horse? Is that just a legend?
Yeah, good point. The only surviving form of life on the battlefield when Terry and Gibbon got there was Keogh's horse Comanche. But he was riddled with bullet holes. They put him on the Far West, take him back to Fort Abraham Lincoln, and get him back to life, and he becomes a showcase for years. Once he dies, they stuff him. But that's Comanche. Thank you. Yes.
Questions? Please,
Brent.
Brent.
So Custer's last words, at least I won't have to go back to North Dakota.
Did you hear that?
What?
Yeah, Custer's last words, at least I won't have to go back to
Oh,
North
yeah.
Dakota.
Oh, yeah. Hey, here's a little story about Custer, Brad. A military detail went back to the Custer or the Little Bighorn battle site, and they exhumed the bones of whom they thought was Custer. Took him to the Army's military academy at West Point, made a monument. But there are questions now, was that really Custer? And the people that are descendants of Custer refuse to let archaeologists dig. So that's something that probably in our generation is not going to be answered. And some people say that's good. But that's added to yours, Brent.
Anybody else?
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Another hand for Walter. Wonderful presentation.